Hello everyone and welcome back to Art History Shorts. So we're going to be continuing with what we talked about in the last two videos, which was the Realist movement in France and the subject matter that was chosen for these paintings, and also the painting techniques themselves. Last week we talked about Courbet's Burial at Ornes and the controversy around it, and we're going to be going even further talking about Edouard Manet's Luncheon on the Grass today. So Luncheon on the Grass is roughly 7 by 9 feet and was exhibited in 1863 at the Salon of Refusals in Paris. This was created separately from the more traditional Salon exhibition by Napoleon III in an attempt to appease spurned artists that were not selected. Typically, before this time, artists had to follow certain societal rules with the subject matters they chose to paint in order to be able to sell their artwork. However, Manet never actually intended to sell Luncheon on the Grass. He did eventually sell it years later, but because he had set out with the intention to not sell it, he was able to push the boundaries in the subject matter that he chose and also in the techniques that he used. This painting is seen as a commentary on the Parisian life at the time, and he was also commenting on what the Academy deemed acceptable for the traditional historical painting. So this idea is very similar to what we talked about with Courbet. This painting is both impressive and ambitious in what it accomplished. It not only challenges historical painting, but it also tackles the other types of traditional painting, which are portraiture, landscape, and still life. A lot has already been written around the controversy of the painting, and I'll touch on that briefly, but I wanted to focus more on the realist movement and how this painting in particular displays the characteristics of that movement. So let's look at each of these genres to show Manet's technique and how this painting contributed to the realist style. So looking at the figures in the foreground first, we have two men dressed in fashionable Parisian attire, and then we see a nude woman. The three figures seem almost separate from each other. There's little interaction or awareness of each other. But the nude woman is very much aware of us, the viewer. Her look is almost challenging and it's unnerving. Among the picnic still life, we see her clothes crumpled in the grass, evidence that she's taken them off. She's not a Venus who appeared this way. There's something about knowing that she's taken them off, that it's not politely hidden from the viewer, that heightens the challenge in her gaze. Direct look breaks with tradition. If a painted nude woman were to look out at the viewer, they would look almost shy or coy, never so frank and challenging. This figure is naked, not nude. She is not Venus or some other mythological woman. Her figure is not idealized as women's figures have been painted before. None of the figures are idealized here. There is nothing timeless about them. In fact, the clothes the men are wearing directly places them in the current time of 1863 fashion. We know that Manet took inspiration from classical paintings. There's a connection to Titian's Pastoral Concert, the same dynamic of two clothed men sitting outside with two women. One is seated and nude, the other is bathing. But the way he painted his foursome is with a realist's eye and technique. Manet's nude figure is hardly painted with any modeling. She is bright and flat. She doesn't feel placed harmoniously in the scene. There's no real sense of like a three-dimensionality here. She contrasts with the darkness of the men and also with the landscape. The style of the landscape and still life in the foreground are loose in comparison with the figures, which set them off from the rest of the painting. Manet painted the landscape without a real sense of depth. It's loosely painted, the brushstrokes are rough and unhidden, something that will become commonplace with the Impressionist paintings. In fact, Manet's painting style is considered to be the bridge between Realism and Impressionism. There is a sense of the painting being unfinished, and in fact, that was what many critics of the time said about his painting. They also criticized the proportional issues of the fourth figure, the woman bathing in the background. She is much too large in comparison to the figures in the foreground. She's more floating on top of the threesome than behind them. But Manet was not the incompetent artist that they criticized him of being. He was deliberately expressing his opinions of the traditional. His painting is consistent with the realist principles of painting a contemporary scene with unidealized figures. Manet is representing his subject matter truthfully, which was shocking for the viewers at the time. They were confronted with a scene of men and an apparent sex worker in a park. This was part of Parisian culture at the time, though. It was a sordid subject matter to choose, an unpleasant truth. Manet and Courbet, like we saw in last week's video, both chose to move away from tradition. They exposed paintings for what they were, two-dimensional images. Paintings were only representational formats. They not only pushed boundaries with the techniques used, like using contour lines, but also with the subject matter chosen. Next week, we'll be finishing up realism with one more painter. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can like or subscribe to the channel if you did, and I'll see you next time.